Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Space Forum this evening. My name is Bert Dicht. I am the Managing Director of Membership for the National Space Society. And on behalf of my colleague, Larry Ahern, Vice President of Chapters, I'd like to welcome you to our Space Forum tonight, Wally Funk, Higher, Faster, Longer. And I'll be introducing our guest speaker shortly, but we're looking for a fun session tonight. As always, I'd like to do a little bit in terms of just going through the agenda. So we'll do some virtual etiquette. I've got a couple of NSS announcements, then some upcoming space forums and town halls, then the program, and we'll do our virtual door prize at the end, and then we'll close out for the evening. As always, feel free to submit a question using the Q&A function. Again, it works best because we can pull those out directly and we don't have to search through all the chat and all that. But also feel free to put something in the chat, comments, questions. We only ask that you be respectful of our panelists and the audience. There were a number of questions that were submitted beforehand. I was just talking to our speaker, and she said a number of them will be addressed in her presentation. But again, feel free to ask questions as we go along. We typically turn on the mic if anyone does want to raise their hand and ask the question verbally. So we can do that as well. So looking forward to a great session tonight with that. As always, we encourage you to give to our cause. If you're enjoying the programming like the Space Forums and Town Halls, please donate to support NSS. We really appreciate the great support from our members and our donors. And I want to thank the donors who made a contribution last week at last week's Space Forum. I will put this link into the chat so you have it. Also, at the end, please complete the Space Forum survey. It only takes a couple of minutes, and it'll go right into it once you exit the survey. It's anonymous. And as I always say, it really does help us in planning future events and trying to keep the quality of these events high. So thank you in advance for doing that. So a couple quick announcements for everybody. The latest issue of Ad Astra, it's issue 2024-2, was just published. And it was in the mail about a week ago. I got mine in the mail today. So go check your mailbox. It typically takes somewhere, based on how these are mailed out, anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks to reach you. And that's because the post office has discretion in how they deliver it. So they might do it fast or they might wait. But figure it's on its way if you haven't yet received it. And you can also go online to our Inside NSS membership portal. It is already online, so you can access it, through your desktop or even now through an Apple iPad as well. Articles and commentary on AI in space. Some of the key articles this month are Beyond Binary Horizons, No Closed Doors, Protecting the Light Consciousness, Beyond Flags and Footprints, that's of course about the moon, the legacy of ingenuity, New Frontiers Celebrating Black History in Space, and New Life for an Old Lunar Module. And there are book reviews and quite a few other great items. So definitely take a look at this latest issue. I know you will enjoy it. And if anyone does have a problem getting it, feel free to reach out to me because we can always send you a replacement if something happens. So just be on the lookout for it. As last week, I did let everyone know about our flagship tour of the Kennedy Space Center. That's going to be September 19th to 22nd. Again, this is a 4-day, 3-night exclusive tour. It's a great opportunity to meet like-minded space exploration enthusiasts and fellow NSS members. And we are going to be sending out an invite. Probably look for that very early in July. That's going to tell you all about it. But you can easily go to galacticmedallion.com/NSS. Again, I can put this into our chat so you have it, or contact concierge galacticmedallion.com. But look for that invite. There you see the last tour back in January, us and at the back end of Atlantis there. So it's a great tour, and I know you would definitely enjoy it. So, and we're actually looking at other options as well. For example, we mentioned that last week, maybe visiting the Johnson Space Center or going out to New Mexico where our guest speaker is tonight. So a lot of things to look forward to in terms of the tour. So just look for that announcement coming up. Okay, and what's coming up in terms of our space forums? I think everything is pretty locked in for July 11th with cybersecurity in space with Bryce Meyer. And I'm planning tentatively a leadership town hall for the 18th. I've already reached out to our NSS leadership to work with them. And so hopefully we'll be able to do that on the 18th. Then going into August, we've got a great presentation with Jonathan Ward and Mike Leinbach about bringing Columbia home, the amazing effort it took to do that after the tragic Columbia accident. And then on the 22nd, Bob Zubrin with his new book, New World on Mars. We're almost locked in. I'm just working to finalize that date. And then I'm also working on everything to happen in September, October. So we've got some great potential speakers and looking forward to some great sessions as we move forward. So now it's my pleasure to move into our program. And again, our program tonight is about Wally Funk, Higher, Faster, Longer. And our guest speaker tonight is Loretta Hall. Loretta is an NSS Space Ambassador, but she is a renowned author, researcher, public speaker. She has written 10 books, and 6 of them relate to spaceflight. And her book, she collaborated on with Wally Funk on her autobiography, again called Wally Funk, Higher, Faster, Longer. So you're going to hear some real great insights to her life and her legacy. And I know you're really going to enjoy this. So it's my pleasure now to turn this over to Loretta. Oh, I should also mention that back last year in April, we were out in New Mexico for a Space Hipsters event, actually, and Loretta gave an amazing talk on New Mexico's role in space. So I think you're going to enjoy her discussion tonight. So Loretta, I'm going to stop sharing and turn this over to you. And there we go.
Well, thank you very much, Bert, and I will start sharing.
Okay, great. And we see it.
There we go. Well, I feel very privileged to have become friends with Wally. I've been a friend of hers now for 7 or 8 years, and she's just such an amazing person. And I was really honored when she asked me to work with her to write her life story, because it's such an inspirational story. She is the most positive person I've ever met, and her perseverance in pursuing her life's goals is just amazing. So I'm happy to have the opportunity to share some highlights of that story with you this evening. Wally was born in 1939. And that was a time when people expected little girls to play with dolls and learn to cook and sew, but that wasn't Wally. When she was about 18 months old, her parents took her down to the local airfield in the little town of Taos, New Mexico, and a DC-3 had landed there. It was an unusually big airplane to have landed at that airport, so they went out to take a look at it. And little Wally walked right up and started inspecting the landing gear. She had the aviation bug and the curiosity at a very early age. As she grew a little bit older, she started playing with model trains. She built a model train layout that wound halfway through her house, and her parents just stepped over it and went about their business. She wanted an erector set for Christmas. She learned to do all sorts of craft things, learned to carve wooden candlesticks that she took out and set up a table outside her dad's 5 and 10 cent store and sold carved candlesticks that she'd made and little toy bows and arrows that she'd made. She built herself a tree house. Her mother would sometimes ask her, "Where are you going to sleep tonight, Wally?" Well, the answer might be in her bedroom, or it might be on a blanket under the stars, or up in her tree house, wherever. Taos, the village of Taos, is adjacent to an Indian pueblo, the Taos Pueblo, that's been occupied for over 1,000 years. And Wally made a lot of friends with the young Native American children, and they taught her camping skills. She liked to ride her horse, Victor, in barrel races at the local rodeos. That picture that you see there in the upper right shows her with her horse, Victor, in front of their barn at their house. And that Wally loves to tell the story of when she was about 5 years old, she decided she was going to fly. And so she put on her Superman costume with its little cape, and she got a ladder out and put it up against the roof of the barn and climbed up onto it, went to the back edge of the barn there and jumped off, flapped her cape. Well, she was smart enough to prepare for the eventuality that it didn't work. So she had put a pile of hay down beneath where she was jumping, and she, in fact, landed in the hay. But she got up, dusted herself off, and climbed back up and tried to jump harder and flap harder, and it just didn't work. So I guess she figured at that point she was going to have to find a more mechanically assisted way to fly. When she was a young teenager, she joined a rifle club and progressed up through all of the possible ranking levels, all the way up to distinguished rifleman. And in qualifying for the distinguished rifleman rating, she had hit bullseyes with all of the targets, and her instructors sent that off to the NRA in Washington, D.C., and she got a congratulatory letter from President Eisenhower that she really treasured. She loved outdoor activities. She loved skiing in the mountains outside of Taos and competed in ski jump and slalom. All of her life, she has appreciated the fact that her parents gave her the freedom and the confidence to be herself and do the things that she wanted to do. And one of the lessons that she learned from her parents was to never be afraid. She said there was no room for fear, because if she was going to do something challenging, then she was told to learn all about it so she would be well prepared, and then she wouldn't have to be afraid. Well, at the age of 17, and at the urging of her parents, I think, she went off to college, and at a 2-year women's college in Missouri, Stevens College. It was a bit refined for Wally's tomboyish tastes, but she adapted pretty well. When she had to pick a major, though, she decided to major in physical education because she loved the outdoor activities and the athletic activities. But it also gave her permission to wear shorts or pants on the days she had PE classes, because otherwise all of the students were required to wear skirts or dresses and dress shoes to classes at Stevens. Well, at Christmas break in her freshman year, she went home to Taos for the break and went skiing with some friends. But when she was riding up the ski lift, one of the cables flipped off and threw her into the air. She landed in deep snow, but she ended up cracking a couple of vertebrae in her back. So when she went back to school, She had to stand in the back of the classroom for her classes because it was uncomfortable to sit for very long with the back brace that she had to wear. And she couldn't participate in physical education classes. So at that point, she learned about the aviation program that they had at Stevens. This had been developed during World War II. Stevens had a number of different majors that would prepare young women for jobs, uh, classes in business, classes in fashion, various sorts of things that would enable them to have a career after they finished their 2-year degree. And so this aviation program they had developed during the war to train women pilots to fly here at home because the male pilots were all overseas fighting in the war. So this program did exist, and Wally decided that was something that she was really interested in. So she changed her major to aviation and flew as a member of the intercollegiate flying team at Stevens, the Flying Susies. She did very well in the intercollegiate meets, won a number of trophies, and each really enjoyed aviation. So she graduated with her AA degree in 1958, and then she decided to go on to complete a bachelor's degree, and she chose Oklahoma State University for the rest of her education because the Flying Aggies were the best intercollegiate flying team in the country at the time. So she went on and flew for the Flying Aggies, did very well there. At both years at the National Intercollegiate Flying Association meets, she was named Flying Aggie top pilot and also outstanding female pilot. In 1960, she graduated, and at that point, she held not only a private pilot's license, which she had earned at Stevens, but also a commercial pilot's license, single-engine land, multi-engine land, single-engine sea, glider, instrument, flight instructors, and all ground instructors' ratings. So she was highly qualified by the time she got her college degree. That summer, she got her first job. She became the first female flight instructor at the U.S. Army's Red Leg Flying Club at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where she was teaching commissioned and non-commissioned officers how to fly. She was thrilled to be able to earn money, a whopping $4 an hour, flying and teaching others to fly. She loved teaching. Her bachelor's degree was in education. And the picture that you see on the right there is her with the first student that she prepared for his first solo flight. Well, in October of that year, that 1960, she was taking a break at the flying club there at Fort Sill, and she picked up the latest issue of Life magazine. And as she was flipping through it, a headline caught her eye: "Damp Prelude to Space. A potential lady orbiter excels in lonesome test." It was a story about Jerry Cobb, another female pilot, who had taken a sensory deprivation test, an isolation test at the at the Veterans Administration Hospital at Oklahoma City. Jerry had already completed and passed the physical examinations that had been given to the Mercury astronaut candidates. Dr. William Randolph Lovelace II at his clinic in Albuquerque, New Mexico, had been selected to develop and administer those tests because he was at that time the head of NASA's Life Sciences Committee, and he had been investigating and studying very high altitude medical issues since the 1930s. So he had administered the tests on behalf of NASA and for the male astronaut candidates. That they were all men, of course. But Jerry had subsequently gone and taken those very same tests and passed them quite convincingly. And then she went on part of the men's tests after they had left the Lovelace Clinic and went on to further testing at Wright Field in Ohio. One of the tests there was an isolation test where they sat in a dark, soundproof room for 3 hours. And that test wasn't available to Jerry, but she arranged for a similar and, in fact, much more demanding isolation test with Dr. Shirley, who was experimenting with that concept at the time. And so this was another test that Jerry was taking to pursue the idea of perhaps becoming an astronaut. Well, Wally read about this and was just fascinated. She knew Jerry Cobb to some extent, at least. They were both women pilots working in Oklahoma. And she thought, gosh, if Jerry can pass tests like that, I bet I can too. And she just promptly fired off a letter to Dr. Shirley and asked him if she could take those same tests or that isolation test. And he wrote back and said, well, he was only tangentially involved with the astronaut physical exam testing, but he suggested that she contact Dr. Lovelace. And so she immediately wrote to Dr. Lovelace and told him that she was really very interested in taking the astronaut physical exams because she'd like to be an astronaut too. And within a few days, she got a letter back from Dr. Lovelace asking for more information. So she sent him more information, more specific information about her aviation experience and a couple of letters of recommendation that he had asked for. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Dr. Lovelace and the tests that he administered. You probably recognize at least the two astronauts that you can see the faces of here, but the physical exams were administered to the official astronaut candidates in February and March of 1959. And they included the normal sorts of things like blood pressure and temperature, but also EEGs and other tests that I'll talk a little bit more about. They were very demanding. Dr. Lovelace called them I forget exactly what the wording is now, but it was the most difficult or demanding physical examinations in history, is basically what he said. 32 men took those exams before they went on for more psychological testing and physical stress testing in Ohio. But after examining all the male candidates, Dr. Lovelace started thinking that there really might be some advantages to having women be astronauts. And so he thought, for example, that women are generally smaller than men, so they'd fit better in that very cramped Mercury capsule. They were also tended to be lighter than men, so that would be a fuel savings for launching. They consume less food and less oxygen than men, so that's another savings in fuel for launch because they had to carry fewer supplies. Their internal reproductive organs might be better protected against radiation. They tended to have fewer heart attacks than men, which might be particularly helpful in microgravity. And there were some studies that showed that women tended to be less vulnerable to loneliness, cold, heat, pain, and noise which might make them psychologically better fit to be astronauts. Now, all of the men who were officially astronaut candidates were, in fact, men, because that women could not satisfy one of the basic selection criteria, which was that they had to be a military test pilot, and that opportunity was not open to women at the time. But Jerry had passed that same physical exam so convincingly that Dr. Lovelace wanted to test some additional women, and that's why he accepted Wally's application along with and also invited a number of other women pilots to undergo that same regimen. He had to come up with his own set of qualifications because, as I said, the women couldn't meet NASA's official qualifications. So he did require that they have a commercial pilot's license, that they be between the ages of 25 and 35, that they be healthy, accomplished, and determined, have a 4-year college degree, and at least 2,000 hours of flying time. Well, Jerry had over 10,000 hours at that point, so she was extremely qualified. Several of the women who were tested were actually flight instructors, as Wally was. They also had to meet the height requirement of being less than 5 feet 11 inches tall and be in excellent physical condition. Well, on February 2nd, 1961, Wally got her invitation, her scheduled time to be at the Lovelace Clinic for her exam. That was the day after her 22nd birthday. She didn't quite meet the age criteria for that Dr. Lovelace had set up, but her qualifications were so good that he made an exception and allowed her to participate anyway. She did have to have her parents sign permission for her, though. She was to report to the Lovelace Clinic 3 weeks from then. Well, she'd been keeping herself in good physical condition, doing 100 sit-ups and 20 push-ups every day. And every day she rode the 8-mile round trip to work on her bicycle, which, as you see there, is the old standard bicycle at the time. There weren't any gears to make it make her pedaling more efficient. So she was in pretty good physical condition. What you see in the upper left there is the Lovelace Clinic as it appeared in 1961. And at the middle of the top row, you see Wally having some EEG leads attached to her head. And this was back in the day when they actually attached those leads by inserting needles under the skin. This was not just the little stick-on patches like we use today. In the upper right, you see John Glenn taking one of the tests. I'm going to be showing you a number of pictures of different people because very few pictures were taken of Wally, or for that matter, any of the women who were participating in the physical exams, and even limited numbers of pictures taken of the men because the process was secret at the time. But the test that John Glenn is taking there is one of the more uncomfortable tests that was administered. It was to determine the subject's propensity to develop motion sickness. So the doctor or the technician, whoever it was injecting very cold water into the ear for a period of 30 seconds, and that disabled the vestibular system. It was painful. And it also was severely disorienting. I think this picture with John Glenn may have been staged. Wally said that when she took that particular test, they actually strapped her into something like a dentist chair so that she wouldn't fall out while she was experiencing that severe disorientation. It also caused rapid involuntary motion of the eyeballs. And that's why Glenn is wearing those calibrated goggles so that an observer could see how rapidly that movement began, how violent it was, and how long it persisted, which was typically 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. And then Wally said after they gave her that exam, they took her into another room and let her rest for an hour and then brought her back to do the other ear. And she said that was even worse because she knew how what was going to happen. In the lower left, you see a picture. This actually is Wally taking a treadmill test. That was one of the others that was done. In the lower row in the middle, you see one of the other women who was tested doing a stationary bicycle test, and this was a pretty severe test. They were told to pedal to the beat of a metronome. And while they were pedaling, the resistance on the rear wheel of the bicycle was constantly increasing and making it more and more difficult. And they were told to keep pedaling as long as they could until they were just too exhausted to keep going. Well, Wally said she asked how long people usually lasted, and they said, well, usually about 10 minutes. And so she made up her mind she was going to go 11, and she did, barely. She said she had to call up her third wind. And when she was finally stopped, they offered to help her get off the bicycle. And she said, no, it's okay, I can do it. And she stepped off and promptly fell flat on the floor because her legs wouldn't even support her anymore. In the lower right, you see a picture of Jerry Cobb. This was one of the more unusual tests, but I think a lot of them were unusual. During the Loveless program, they were flown up to Los Alamos National Laboratory and slid into this massive metal cylinder and sealed in there while the natural radiation in their bodies was measured. Just to give you a few little glimpses of what the rather bizarre exams that were part of that regimen. There were, counting Wally and Jerry Cobb, a total of 19 women were tested at the Loveless Clinic. 12 of them passed without medical reservation. That was 68%. Of the men who were tested, 56% of them passed at that level. Just saying. Those 13 women who passed ultimately became known as the Mercury 13, a nod to the Mercury 7, who were the official first astronauts of NASA. Just to give a little bit of context for the timing of all of this, Wally took her test, and most of the women did, before any human being had actually experienced the space environment. Wally was tested in February of 1961, after the men had been tested 2 years prior to that. And Yuri Gagarin's flight was just a few months after that, and followed very quickly by Alan Shepard's first suborbital flight. So these women were really at the forefront of human spaceflight. As I said, after the men took their testing at Loveless, they went on for additional testing at Wright Field. Jerry, after she passed the Loveless test, didn't have that exact opportunity, but she did have an opportunity to go to Pensacola Naval Air Station and undergo some more advanced tests there that actually had more to do with her ability to function in a space-like environment. And so one of the things she did, for example, as you see in the upper left, was ride the multi-axis trainer, where she was sitting inside a gyroscope that rotated her simultaneously in all three directions, just in random orientations, and she had to try and control that with the sticks in her hands. She rode that for 45 minutes and loved it. The upper right photo, that's not Jerry, but it illustrates one of the other tests that she took at Pensacola, which was to spend 30 minutes in a room that rotated at 10 revolutions per minute. So in doing that, she had to try and walk across the room toward a certain object. But as she was walking, of course, that object was changing position with respect to her path, and she had to figure out how to walk in that condition, or how to throw a ball into a a basket that kept moving relative to her. And the bottom picture shows another one of the tests that she took there, which she was wearing a full flight suit strapped into an airplane cockpit that was then dropped into a swimming pool. And she had to get out of that and out of the pool without any assistance. So these were all pretty challenging tests. And after the other 12 women had passed the Loveless exams, they were scheduled to go to Pensacola and undergo that similar battery of tests that Jerry had passed. But just a few days before they were to show up in Pensacola, they got a telegram from Dr. Loveless telling them that the tests had been canceled. Apparently, somebody had asked about the propriety of using the naval facilities for civilian testing and asked NASA for authorization, and NASA said, well, that's not our program. We're not going to authorize that. So the tests were canceled. The tests were really a research project of Dr. Loveless, and the women were never officially NASA astronaut candidates because of the way they were treated and some of the communications that they received. Many of them, probably most of them, really believed that they would be considered to become astronauts because of the abilities that they demonstrated. But at this point, with the program being canceled, most of them had to realize that their dreams of going into space just would never going to materialize. But not Wally. She wasn't ready to give up. She said that if the Loveless tests were canceled, she would come up with the Wally Funk program, find her own way. One of the things that she had learned from her Native American friends growing up was an expression called throw it a fish. It basically means if you're trying to do something and you hit a roadblock that you cannot overcome, you just throw it a fish and go on. Find another way to pursue your dream. Don't let it get you down, basically. So she decided to come up with some additional ways to prepare herself and to test herself to see if somehow she could become an astronaut. So the first thing she did, with Jerry Cobb's help actually, was to take the same isolation test that Jerry had taken at the Veterans Administration Hospital. Jerry arranged for Wally and one of the other Mercury 13, Rhea Hurley, to take that same test. And this is actually a picture of Jerry Cobb, and I think it's actually a staged picture taken later for the Life magazine article about the test that she had undergone. But she's wearing quite a bit of flotation equipment there. When Wally took the test, she said they gave her 2 blocks of foam, each about the size of a brick, and told her to put one behind her lower back and one behind her neck and just float in this tank, 8 feet diameter, 8 feet deep, and float there for as long as she could. For the 2 days prior to the test, to the water portion of the test, she had taken some extensive psychological evaluations, and they had been taking her temperature every couple of hours during those 2 days, and she was asking them why. And they said, oh, you'll find out later. Well, it turned out once she was floating in the tank, which was in a completely dark room, soundproofed room, and she realized that the temperature of the water was exactly her average body temperature. So she couldn't even feel the water. It completely deprived her of all 5 of her senses. Apparently, Jerry was the first woman to take this test. Dr. Shirley had been administering this sort of test to a bunch of male volunteers for an extended period of time prior to that. But apparently, after several hours in the tank, a lot of them just couldn't take it anymore. They just sort of lost it. Some of them started hallucinating. It was a very challenging test. Jerry had really set a record when she took the test and stayed in about 9.5 hours before Dr. Shirley finally told her, "That's really long enough, Jerry, you can get out now." But when Wally went in to take the test, she was floating there. There was a microphone hanging above her so they could hear if she wanted to talk to them during the test, which she really didn't. She didn't feel like she had anything to say. Um, she floated there happily. They had told her to stay in as long as she felt comfortable there, and if whenever she wanted to get out, to let them know, and they'd turn on the lights so she could get out. But she floated there happily, and finally they told her, "Time to get out." So she did, and put a towel around herself, went out into the next room, and she immediately turned around to look at the clock on the wall because she was curious as to how long she'd stayed in, but they'd covered up the clock, so she couldn't tell. They gave her a few more psychological tests to see what her mental condition was like at the time, and then finally told her she'd stayed in for 10 hours and 35 minutes. Following that, she arranged a couple of years later, she arranged to take some other tests. The next three photos are not related to Wally particularly, but they do show what the test equipment looked like at about that time period. She rode the human centrifuge at the University of Southern California, where they ran her up to about 6 Gs of force. It wasn't too hard for her to adapt to because she'd been pulling 3 Gs doing aerobatics in her airplane anyway. She took, as you see in the lower left, an airplane seat ejection seat test, I should say. And when she slammed back down to the ground, she thought for a second, "Uh-oh, I wonder if that hurt my back again." But she didn't suffer any back damage from it. She did get a bad headache, but they told her they had a cure for that. They took her over and put her in the high altitude chamber, as you see in the lower right. She was the first woman to to experience the high altitude chamber at El Toro Marine Base in Southern California. And during that experience, she experienced hypoxia when they told her to take off her oxygen mask at simulated high altitude, and she learned how disorienting that was and how much it interfered with her ability to function without her realizing that she was having trouble functioning. And that became a very valuable lesson to her in her work as a flight instructor, to convince other people that if they were going to fly at altitude, they really be sure to wear their oxygen masks. But she passed all of those tests. And in the meantime, she had a life to live. She had a career to begin. So she took a job at a general aviation airport in Southern California. Her parents had moved to California by that time, and so she moved there as well. And she became the chief pilot at Hawthorne Airport in Southern California. And she bought a Stearman biplane, which she just loved to fly. She did aerobatics in it. And as you see in the bottom right picture, she also taught aerobatics in it. She learned to parachute. She took whenever any opportunity related to anything having to do with aviation, any opportunity that came up, she grabbed it, like an opportunity to fly in the Goodyear blimp and take over the controls for part of the flight. So she was loving life while she was still pursuing her goal. While she was chief pilot at Hawthorne, the job of the chief pilot involves ensuring the safety and the professionalism of the entire general aviation airport and its flight instructing activities. and also investigating any mishaps that might happen. And in that role, she began to know some people at the Federal Aviation Administration. And in 1971, one of those people asked her if she'd like to come to work for the Federal Aviation Administration as its first female inspector. And her initial thought was, well, I don't know if I can do that. And then she stopped herself and said, of course I can do that. And so she accepted and did the training and went to work for 4 years with the FAA, overseeing inspecting flight schools to make sure that they were operating correctly and following all the appropriate regulations. She responded to aviation complaints, like if someone called in and reported that an airplane had been buzzing their house, for example, or she got a complaint one time from somebody who called in and said, I'm being followed because a helicopter is following me every day when I drive to and from work. And she had to explain that the time that he was driving to and from work was the same time the air traffic, the reporters were flying in helicopters and reporting on traffic conditions. She gave check rides to pilots who were trying to pursue additional ratings, and she helped investigate some aviation accidents, particularly ones that were relatively minor, not fatalities. But in doing that, she's had some interactions with people who worked for the National the National Transportation Safety Board. And in 1974, they hired her away from the FAA to make her the first female investigator for the National Transportation Safety Board. And she investigated aviation accidents for the next 10 years. She investigated about 450 accidents, most of which involved at least one, if not multiple, fatalities. She developed a safety presentation called How to Fly and Stay Alive that she would present to various groups. And I guess, most famous accident, or the most dramatic accident that she investigated as lead inspector and lead investigator, happened in San Diego in 1978 when a small private plane collided with a commercial airliner. And both people in the Cessna, 135 people in the Boeing 727, and 7 people on the ground were killed in that accident. Wally arrived on the scene while the flyer was still burning 2 hours after it happened. She was based up in Los Angeles. And she and her team collected every piece that they could find of both aircraft, brought them back after documenting where they were. They brought them back to a warehouse where they tried to reassemble them like a distorted 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, trying to figure out what had caused the accident, and matching up pieces from one aircraft where it had collided with the other, for example. She reviewed tapes of conversations between the pilots and the traffic control tower, also tapes of conversations that took place in the cockpit of the commercial airliner in the minutes leading up to the collision, and ultimately decided that in this case, as in probably most of the cases that she investigated, it was human error and inattention that had led to the tragedy. So in 1985, after 10 years of that kind of rather stressful work, she retired from the National Transportation Safety Board and decided to set out on her own. She established a flight school at Taos, her hometown of Taos, New Mexico, where she wanted to teach mountain flying. She invented the Wally stick that you see her in the left-hand photo there. It's a very simple device, but it can be in half a dozen ways to help with pre-flight inspections of aircraft. She earned her captain's stripes by becoming a pilot for a regional airline. She gave her safety presentation all around the United States and also in China, Russia, and India. And she loved teaching people to fly, especially young people, because they had so much time ahead of them to enjoy flying. On one of those trips, to speak in a foreign country, she went to Russia in 1988 with the 99s organization that she belonged to of women pilots. And she accomplished a goal that she had had for 20 years, that of meeting Valentina Tereshkova. They met at the conference and had a chance to talk through an interpreter, of course. Valentina had been the first woman in space back in 1963, back during the Cold War era, and the Soviet Union scored some PR points by putting a woman into space alone in a spacecraft that orbited the Earth for 3 days. But it was 19 years before another woman went into space, and that was Svetlana Savitskaya, another Soviet woman who went into space to preempt the PR move of America's first woman flying into space, Sally Ride. As time went on, Wally continued to find ways to test herself and pursue that dream of someday flying into space. In 1991, she spent 3 days at the adult space camp in Huntsville, Alabama. She flew a multi-axis trainer, and she, as you see in the lower left photo there, rode what they call a 5 degree of freedoms chair, which if I add up the degrees of freedom, I think I come up with more than 5. But this thing was built so that it floated on a cushion of air, and it was mechanically is built in such a way that it just moves in any direction at all, in response to the movements of the person that's in it, or in response to them touching something else. So it simulates an EVA basically, and working on the exterior of a space station. And then she participated in 2 simulated space shuttle missions, one as spacecraft systems officer in mission control, and one as commander of the lab aboard a shuttle during a mission. A few years later, some opportunities started arising. The commercial space industry was just beginning to come into being. And a company called Seagram Voyages, which a couple of years later was bought out by Space Adventures, had a plan to fly paying customers in suborbital flights from an air-launched spacecraft. And so she first heard about this opportunity in 1997. And at that point, the spacecraft was still in its design stages, and the first test flight was envisioned to happen about 2001, with commercial flights taking place a few years after that. And so one of the things she did to prepare for an opportunity to take a suborbital flight like that was to go to the Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, Russia. The Discovery Channel helped her with that. They provided the opportunity for her to do that, and filmed her participation there for a documentary. And so during that experience, she learned about the EVA suits that the cosmonauts used. She participated in a mock docking of a Soyuz spacecraft with the Mir space station. and she got a chance to enjoy brief periods of microgravity during parabolic airplane flights. She was 61 years old at that point. Well, things didn't quite work out with Vela Technologies developing their spacecraft, but by 2002, another opportunity presented itself. A company called Interorbital Systems had plans to develop a vertical takeoff uh, spacecraft that would take paying passengers into a full week in orbit. And as they were working on that technology, the rocket technology, um, another opportunity for funding arose for them. They had already signed Wally on board as being a potential pilot for their commercial flights, and they were trying to raise money by using her for publicity to get people to contribute and buy sponsorships. Um, but another opportunity arose as well with the Ansari X Prize. This was a competition that was designed to to encourage the commercial development without any government funding of a rapidly reusable suborbital spacecraft that would carry a pilot and 2 passengers into the past the Kármán line of 100 kilometers or 62 miles, and then land safely, and then repeat that trip within 2 weeks with the exact same vehicle. So and the Interorbital Systems decided they would enter that competition as well, because the prize for winning it was $10 million, which would really help them in developing their orbital program. It was going to be launched partially submerged in the ocean, way out in the island by the island of Tonga. Was a very exotic plan. But they didn't get their rocket built in time. Oh, and they wanted Wally to pilot their entry in during the X Prize competition, and then go on to be a pilot for their orbital program. But before they got their rocket ready for competition, Burt Rutan won the X Prize in 2004 with his Spaceship One technology, which Richard Branson immediately decided to license and develop his Virgin Galactic company to provide commercial suborbital space flights from an air-launched rocket ship, a little bit like what Vela Technologies had been trying to do earlier. And in 2010, Wally ponied up a couple $100,000 to buy a ticket on Virgin Galactic. I guess at this point, she had decided she was not going to become an official astronaut for NASA anymore. She was past their age limits anyway, probably, but she'd applied to NASA 4 times and never met their education requirements because she didn't have an engineering degree. So she bought a ticket on Virgin Galactic. They envisioned starting their commercial space flights 2 years later in 2012. And that didn't happen. Turned out to be a lot more challenging to develop scaled up versions of the vehicles that had won the X Prize. And so they had repeated delays of getting their ship ready to fly passengers. And at this point, Wally was starting to consider, well, maybe it's never going to happen. She really still believed in her heart she was someday going to fly to space, but in her head, she began to think, well, maybe it's not going to happen. But then something did happen. In the summer of 2021, she got a letter from some people that worked for a company called Blue Origin that said they'd like to come and talk with her. She liked to talk with people, so she said, come on. And they came and chatted with her for a while, and then they said, well, Jeff Bezos would like to talk with you come and meet with you also. And she said, okay, fine. And they left, and she talked to her friend and advisor, Mary Holzenbeck, and said, who's Jeff Bezos? And Mary told her that he had been the founder of Amazon and that he had a lot of money and he developed this company called Blue Origin. And one of the things it was planning to do was commercial suborbital flights. And oh, okay, that's really interesting. I should be happy to talk with him. So um, Jeff and his entourage came to meet with her at her home in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And after they had chatted for some time and he had described what this suborbital launch was going to be like that he was planning to do, he said, Wally, I'm going to go into space and I want to take you with me. And he offered her a free ticket to be on the first passenger carrying flight of Blue Origin. And she was stunned and thrilled. She just couldn't believe it because the rocket, the spacecraft had already been tested. It was ready to go. Her flight would be in a month. This was not anymore just a dream that somebody had. This was real. So she started getting ready. She flew to, Miss Jeff Bezos sent a private jet to fly her to the launch site in West Texas 3 weeks later. She arrived there and enjoyed the fact that she got to take the controls of that little jet airplane for a little while on the way there. Picked up her custom-made flight suit, went through 3 days of training for the suborbital flight, and then she and Jeff and his brother Mark Bezos and 18-year-old Oliver Damon, whose father had won a ticket in a charity auction, took their flight on July 20th, 2021. It was a vertical takeoff launch. They reached an altitude of about 66 miles, spent 4 minutes enjoying microgravity and free fall, landed, came down for a soft landing that was parachute and retro rocket assisted, and Wally became the oldest person to fly into space, a record which was broken just a few months later when William Shatner, at the age of 90, beat that record. But she, at the age of 82, became the oldest woman to fly into space and still holds that title. But what's more important to her than having that title is the fact that she finally reached her goal. She finally achieved the space flight that she had been trying to do since 1960, the goal that she had been pursuing for all those years. You can find out more about Wally's story, more details about other adventures that she had in her memoir, Higher, Faster, Longer, My Life in Aviation and My Quest for Spaceflight. We also have a middle school version of it. And the adult version actually came out the year before Wally took her flight with Blue Origin. So we had to come out with a second edition of the book. So be sure to look for the one that has the mission patch on the front cover. There's also information about her and a way to contact her at her website, wallyfly.com. And as I finish, I'd like to just mention that I'm especially happy that this presentation is taking place right now during the 41st anniversary of Sally Ride's flight as the first American woman into space. And that started the ball rolling with NASA to accept women as astronauts. Several others were in the same class of astronauts with Sally. There were 6 of them in that class. And then a little over a decade later, Wally was especially thrilled when Eileen Collins became the first woman to be the pilot and then the commander of the space shuttle. And she and Eileen are good friends. Wally is proud of the fact that the United States has not only put a couple of women into space as PR moves, but has actually embraced women astronauts as routine participants in human spaceflight. So at that point, I'll be happy to take any questions that people might have.
Thanks so much, Loretta. Maybe it'd be easier if you stop sharing.
I will do that.
Yep.
There we go.
That was what an amazing life she's had.
Oh, she's a kick. She is the most energetic person as well as the most positive and persistent that I've ever met.
One of the questions I saw that someone submitted was, you said you had mentioned you met her about 8 or 9 years ago. How did that meeting first happen?
Well, it was a little scary. I I I had never really known much about aviation. I'd been focused on human spaceflight, but not aviation as such. But someone I knew who was also a private pilot said, you should you should go and give a talk at the Women in Aviation International Conference, because women pilots, a lot of them are also interested in space history. So I got on the program to give a talk at their conference, and the talk was called Women Space Pioneers from New Mexico. And of course, Wally being a native New Mexican, she was one of the people I was going to be talking about. So I'm up in the front of the room waiting, as people are starting to come in to hear my talk, and in walks Wally Funk. I think, oh my gosh. I mean, she's very recognizable. She's tall, shocking white hair. And so she comes in, sits down. When I get to that point in my talk where I'm going to be talking about her, I said, okay, the next person I'm going to tell you about is sitting right there. And if I say anything that's not quite right, Wally, tell me. So I did my spiel. And after I was finished with my talk, she came up, gave me a big hug, and we became instant friends. We just connected. And it's just been a real thrill since then.
That is fabulous. I know one of the questions had to do with how the flight on New Shepard came about. So you kind of explained that it was Blue Origin that reached out to her.
Absolutely. And we never did quite figure out how they heard about her, how they knew her story, but they reached out to her, and it was um, um, just a wonderful gesture to fulfill her dream.
Did she have much contact with some of her Mercury 13 colleagues after that happened?
Um, after
Yeah.
the Mercury 13 program, you mean? Or
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, not much. Most of them never met until a couple of decades later. Because even though the men, when they went to Lovelace for their testing, they came in groups of about half a dozen at a time, but the women came either individually or at most two at a time. And so most of them never met each other until much later, when there were a few reunion events.
And I know Eileen Collins invited some of them to see her launch, right?
That was one of the reunion events, yeah. The 7 of them were able to come to her first launch, and then Wally was there for all 4 of Eileen's launches.
Wow, fabulous. There were a couple questions. Let me see what was submitted first, and I'll go through those, and then I'll get some that were. Let's see. Did she have? Carl asked a couple questions. Did she have any siblings?
She had a brother, but he was 8 years older, so they're they kind of grew up separately in a way.
Right. And I think I remember, by the end, she's had like about 18,000 flying hours, something in that.
19,600.
19,600. Did she have a favorite aircraft?
Well, she has owned 4 airplanes, and I think 3 of them were Cessnas, and then her very favorite was that Stearman biplane.
Stearman, okay. Fabulous. So let me get a few that were in and that were submitted beforehand. Any behind the scenes insights or anecdotes from your working with her that you'd like to share?
Well, she is, besides the other adjectives that I've used to describe her, she loves people. She's just a very genuine person. When anybody comes up and recognizes her and sort of in awe congratulates her on her accomplishment, she says, "Oh, I'm just the kid next door." She's a very, very humble, very when you go into a restaurant with her, it's probably a place she's eaten before, and she knows all the servers and she gives them hugs. I mean, she's just a very friendly, very loving person.
That is fabulous. Oh, I have to share a story that Barbara Harris posted in the chat. She said she met Wally at an adult space camp. They became instant friends. When she and her husband got married in 1992, they were both pilots and wanted to get married on a plane, and Wally was their pilot and a witness. Wow.
Yes, that story is in the book.
Yes.
Yeah, there's just it's amazing the things that she's done. I'm delighted that what Nancy, was that the name of the person?
Barbara Harris.
Barbara Harris. I'm so happy that she's here tonight.
Fabulous. In terms of the New Shepard flight, did she have any reservations? Granted, it had done a lot of flight tests without people, but this was the very first one that was going to be with people. And obviously, Jeff Bezos was flying on it. But did she have any reservations at that point? No.
She was just so happy to be able to go.
And someone did ask that in the submitted questions, would she want to go again?
Oh yeah. She said after that was over, now I want to go to orbit. She just never quits.
Very good. Another good question. What lessons from Wally's life do you think are most relevant for aspiring aviators and astronauts today?
Well, she is very dedicated to educating and inspiring young people. And what she wants people to understand is um, to envision what you want to have happen. Where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? And then figure out what it's going to take to make that a reality, and then go do those things. And as I said, not to be afraid to reach out and do things that seem like maybe they're more than you can handle, but learn what it takes to do them safely, and then do them.
Right, right. There was a very interesting question. How is society able to promote the idea that chronological age is not a barrier to increase human capacity for space travel? So she's definite proof of that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And space flight is challenging, but I mean, when I was, oh gosh, in my late 60s, I participated in a medical research study that the University of Texas Medical Branch was doing about to find out how people of in the older age ranges, and also people with chronic health issues, might be able to safely experience suborbital flight. And I spent a couple of days at the the NASTAR Center, National Aerospace Training and Research Center. And we had training for a couple of days. We rode the centrifuge in simulated Virgin Galactic flight. And it was amazing how that felt. It did not feel like you were going in circles. It felt like you were flying. And it was, up to 6 Gs. Okay, I could handle that. I learned how to do it. And I think there, those kinds of experiments also showed that people with various chronic health issues could handle it safely. So there's some good research being done to establish that.
Right. And I'd see a question from Eleanor, who you might know, Eleanor O'Rangers. She said, "Did Wally undergo centrifuge training at their facility in Warminster, PA, the Johnsville centrifuge area? You know,
No, not, I don't believe so. She did Southern California.
okay,
Yeah.
very good. Let me see. There are a few other. Oh, did Wally ever get her money back, her deposit back from Virgin Galactic?"
Yeah, actually she did. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that one took a little longer than they expected, as you mentioned.
Yeah, well, it is rocket technology, you know,
Right, right.
rocket science.
Let me see a few other questions here. Are there any plans for an actual biography of Wally?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Um, there there's an option, a movie option, but who knows whether it'll take, you know, uh, options happen more often than they are actually fulfilled. So
Right.
we will see.
And let's see, did she ever, do you know if she ever met Sally Ride?
Uh, I am not sure. She has known a lot of the women astronauts, but I don't know for sure if she met Sally.
Okay. And I'd see a question from Elizabeth. How did you personally become interested in writing about space-related topics?
Well, it started when I was 12 years old. That's the year the Mercury astronauts were presented to the country, and I was hooked, you know. And then, uh, you know, went through various stages of life and went through college, have sort of a natural inclination to learn about things and then teach other people. So I taught school for a while, and then eventually decided I wanted to have a career, a second career as a writer of nonfiction, and that especially once the commercial space industry really started to get going well, and the spaceport was built here in New Mexico, and I really got into focusing on that subject matter.
Right, right. Very good. And do you have a favorite book at this
Oh
point?
gosh. My bookcase is perpendicular to us, so you can't see how full it is. But uh, let's see. Oh gosh, there's so many.
There,
Uh,
no, there are some many good ones. Yes.
yeah, just
And
about anything having to do with nonfiction about human spaceflight is just fascinating.
right. I see another similar question about Sally Ride. Carl's asking, did you know if she ever met William Shatner?
Oh, no, not that I know of. I mean, she did meet some of the Mercury astronauts.
Right.
She was, let's see. Oh, well, I'm not going to recall the right names right
Yeah.
off the top of my head, but she did meet, I think, about three of the Mercury astronauts.
Well, as you mentioned, her life was one of persistence and really and just continuously pursuing that dream. Did she talk about, what was the most difficult obstacle she had to really overcome? Obviously being a pilot when she was, it was a male dominated and still is in effect.
Mhm.
But to go on and be an inspector for the FAA, an inspector for the NTSB, so just extraordinary firsts.
Yeah, yeah, um, she broke a lot of glass ceilings for women, but she didn't do it as a feminist crusader, if you will. She did it because those were the jobs she wanted to do. It was just that simple. And as one of her favorite sayings is the only thing a woman needs to succeed in a man's world is ability. and that was her attitude. And she occasionally experienced a few men who weren't happy with that,
Right.
but she threw out a fish.
She threw, I love that. Fabulous. I'm going to take one last question because I know we're already past our time and we still have to give out our door
Mm.
prizes. So Dave is asking, can you tell us anything about the type of training she received for her, Virgin Galactic flight?
Oh, for the Blue
Or Blue
Origin
Origin
flight.
flight, Blue Origin flight. Sorry about that. Yep.
Yeah, it was mostly safety type training of the seat had a pretty substantial 5-point harness arrangement,
Mm,
and so they did a lot of practicing with getting that on and off and back on again, so they could enjoy the weightlessness atmosphere and then buckle back up again. And I guess in the simulator that they had there, once they were strapped in, they actually they ran a simulation so they could feel some of the vibration and the noise and that sort of thing. Um, and practicing the communications with the ground control, and they had classroom instruction about the trajectory that they would be flying, and what that would entail. So those were the main things.
great. Any final thoughts before we go into our virtual door prize?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to tell people her story. She's just such an inspiration to me and to a lot of other people, and hopefully to even more people as we get the story out.
Fabulous. Very good. Well, thank you so much, Loretta. So we're going to give away 4 copies of the book that you co-authored with Wally. And let me share my screen again here. And I'll bring up my slide deck. Okay. Oops, there we go. So actually, before I go into the virtual book door prize, our friend Tim Gagnon, who has designed quite a few patches, he put together this patch for Wally, Our Dream Realized, and it imagines the view from the spacecraft window, and then there's a Mercury 13 lapel pin floating in microgravity. And it lists the names of the Mercury 13. So Tim, asked if I would just share that. If anyone is interested, he has a few left, and there'd be $15. And I'm going to actually grab one, and that would include postage in the US. So you can contact Tim at kscartist@aol.com, or feel free to reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with Tim. So beautiful patch to recognize the accomplishment. So now we do want to go into the virtual door prize, everybody. So let me tell you how we're doing this. So there are 4 copies of the newest version, as Loretta mentioned. That includes the Blue Origin flight. So I've got everyone's name on a list, and I just used the list as you registered for the Space Forum, and then put numbers next to that in order. And then I'm using a random number generator that I've got on my iPad. So I'm going to just put those in, and then we'll see I typically want to make sure we give it to people who are actually still on, but I know we're kind of late right now. So let's see where we end up, and how many times we have to go through people, and we'll try to do that. So if you hear your name, just put it into the chat that you're on, and we'll go from there. So the first person is Eric McAllister. Eric, are you here? And let's see if we see Eric's. Okay, Eric, fabulous. So we've got one book for you. So I'll follow up with you and let you know what we need to do to get you the book. So fabulous. Okay, let me try another one. And let's see, that worked out pretty well. Oops. And Tina Boyson. Tina, are you on? Okay, it doesn't look like. Anyone see Tina raise her hand or anything? I don't see it. Let me drop my pen here. Okay, let's try another. And we've got, oh, Tom Usiak. Tom, are you on? And Tom is on. Great, Tom. We've got one for you. Fabulous. Okay, two more to go. I feel like a game show host. Okay, Brian Yakatani. Brian, are you on? Good to saw you out at the ISDC. Okay, don't see Brian yet. I'll give you another chance, Brian. Let me try one more and we'll see if Brian comes in. Okay.
Brian's raising his hand.
Oh, Brian raised his hand. Fabulous. Okay. Okay, so Brian is on. Okay, we got that. So we got one more to give out. Okay, and let's do that. Okay, and Avinash,
Ah.
from India. Avinash, you there?
I know he was here earlier.
Yep, there we go. Look at that.
Oh,
So we've got our 4 door prize winners. Fabulous, everybody. So I'll follow up with each of you so we can work. I'm going to be passing the names on to Loretta. So she is going to personalize them, personalized autograph for you. And then I'll get the books back, and then we will send them out to you. And we'll close out. I see that Carl has his hand raised. Carl always likes to ask a question. So I'm going to let him do that. Let's see, Carl, let me just work to get you. Okay, where are you? I'll let you talk, Carl. Let me just do that. Okay, Carl, you should be able to talk.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Ask your question.
In my question before, I was asking really if Loretta had any kind of idea to write a biography about Wally herself.
well, I feel like this book has told Wally's story. We all our memories are not recordings. We remember things a certain way, and maybe they're historically accurate and maybe they're not. And so when Wally told me her story, I went through and really tried to verify as much as I possibly could of her experiences, make sure they happened when and where she remembered them, and happened the way she remembered them. And so I feel like really um, this is more than just a memoir. It's close to a biography, and there are aspects of her adventures that I didn't mention tonight. So it's a more complete picture than what I talked about tonight too.
May I very quickly just ask one more? And where did you get your resources for this? Did you speak to her directly?
Oh yeah, we spent a lot of time together. And I still visit her when I get a chance. I live in New Mexico. She's in Texas, so it's not
nice,
too
nice.
often. But yeah, we're still friends even after the book came out. But yeah, and I did all kinds of research and reading other accounts of some of the other Mercury 13 people, and newspaper articles, and anything I could get my hands on.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Good presentation, and I'm sure that you inspired not only some girls to consider something in this area, but also everybody else, including
Sure.
guys as well, because it's quite
Absolutely.
inspirational.
Thank you. Good to see you, Carl.
Good to see you too.
And Loretta, I want to allow Judith Halem to talk. She's the one who communicated to me earlier that she's a friend of Wally's, and
Okay.
Judith, I'm gonna allow you to talk. So you might be on mute, so just look for that. Are you there, Judith?
It looks like she's muted.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's see. I don't know what system you're using. You're saying, how can I get into the screen? I don't know. Let's see. Let me just go back and see what. Okay, she's off the Zoom. She's trying to get back. Let's give her just a second. Well, as we get to her, Loretta, thank you so much. It was just a great talk and so much fun to hear about her life. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Bert. I appreciate the opportunity.
Let's see. Judith, you're still on mute. Okay. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do to unmute you. Yeah. As a moderator, I should be able to. You would think I should be able to unmute somebody. Let's see. Okay. Well, we might not be able to get you.
Well, Judith, if you go to Wally's website, wallyfly.com, there's a contact us form there, and you can send us your comments there.
And I will close out with one insightful comment. That it just random. All the guys won the book. Yet the story is about a female struggle. Okay.
Well, the guys have to know too.
Yes. They need to be enlightened. So
That's right.
Judith will try to follow up with you afterward. So let me close out then, everybody. So thank you all for joining us. Thank those who are hung around. I know we're quite a bit over our time. So as always, again, I want to thank Loretta for a great talk. I want to thank Fred Becker, as always, for doing the technical side of these presentations, and also my colleague Larry Ahern. So everybody, thank you also for joining us tonight. And as always, I like to say, if you are in today's time zone, have a great rest of the evening. If you are in tomorrow's time zone, wishing you a great day ahead. And of course, everybody have a great weekend. So stay safe, and we'll see you next on July 11th to talk about a really important issue, cybersecurity in space. So with that, everybody, I want to say good night, and we'll hope to see you in a few weeks. Take care, everybody. Fred, you can turn off the recording.